Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. I've got a little bit of different content for you today. I am a fan of Tim Pool, and I'm a member of Timcast. And I recommend you guys go check him out, on YouTube or Rumble, wherever you can find him, because he kind of walks the middle of the road. But what he's doing is in certain spaces is kind of amazing. The title of this episode is called Infringed because it mirrors a documentary that he put out, or that he funded, and Lauren Southern and her crew put together. And it's an hour and 41 minutes that you probably should watch, and the only way you can watch it is to subscribe to Timcast. You can do that for like $5, $10 a month, something like that. I don't know, it's one of the streaming services I subscribe to because I actually like Tim Pool's stuff. I like his content, and it's a way for me to get access to his after show. Now, I'm not advocating strictly for that, but it is how he's been able to fund such things like this. So what is interesting is that that Lauren Southern is a somewhat controversial but very beautiful lady. And I mean that because she's very intelligent. That's attractive to someone like me. But anyway, what is interesting is she goes through several places. She went to Baltimore, and I'm not going to dime out all the stuff here, so there may be spoilers here. I'm recommending you watch it, subscribe and watch it so that he can support more endeavors like this. And we need this in the 2A. In this documentary, Brandon Herrera, Donut Operator are in it. There's several other people that, are of note in the political sphere, but also just normal people. Lauren goes to Baltimore and she talks to people on the street about what it's like in Baltimore with all the crime and what are the root causes of it. She addresses very succinctly how the media, mass media, legacy media, goes about demonizing us in the 2A every time there's a school shooting or that there's a mass shooting event in this country. If you look at the statistics, and she cites them, that support for gun control usually happens right after one of these events, and then it slowly wanes away. She went from Baltimore to all the way to Berkeley. In Berkeley, California, she found some people that were very anti-2A, but overwhelmingly what she found was there's a huge population of us American citizens that don't believe that disarmament is the answer. And we know this because we are in the 2A. That's how New Mexico, I've said this before and I'll say it again, New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union started because of the gun ban push in New Mexico. And to address it in the only way I knew how was to speak out loud and protest, go out and protest these guys when they go to the roundhouse, because we got the gun control that we didn't want in New Mexico. We ended up with the red flag laws because our governor found a way to push it and use the budget process to get that going. And she's looking at it now even harder. She's still got the prohibition on the 2A in public places in Albuquerque, despite that there's still rampant crime in Albuquerque because criminals don't listen to gun laws. They don't obey them. One of the most powerful interviews she does in this Infringed documentary is she interviews a man who lost his daughter in the Florida shooting. And the Florida shooting, I'm talking about the Florida school shooting. The one where the kid was known. He had been on the radar. In fact, his mom brought him to school that day with a Cabela's gun bag. That it goes beyond the pale to think that, I've introduced my kids to the 2A. I did this as a safety measure because I didn't want them to go to someone else's house and run into a gun, because that's kind of common. It was for my age group, let alone theirs nowadays. and not be able to deal with and handle a firearm or know what to do if they ran into one. So I started teaching my kids at a very young age. I think Aaron was like 3 or 4 when I got him, my youngest son. And I started teaching him how to shoot and how bad this stuff can be and how great it can be, how fun it can be. And that's one of the things that Brandon Herrera does with Lauren is he takes her shooting and he lets her shoot the fun stuff that we all want to shoot, and shows that there is some recreation here and talks about how YouTubers, gun tubers specifically, are actually becoming entertainment, and that's changing the narrative around the 2A. It's one of the reasons why I started New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union is because I know that there is a lot more support, especially in New Mexico, even though it's blue as hell because of Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces, but we're still a 2A southwestern state. We know that our response times are going to take forever, and she brings up response times. So do those people in Baltimore. These people are ravaged by gun crime. The other thing that I found very interesting about this is she brought up the rooftop Koreans. And what the situation around that happened was Rodney King during the riots. There was people from the South Korean military that had immigrated to the United States who aren't strangers to guns. They were trained by Americans, and they were trained by their military to be very proficient with firearms. And you can see that during the riots, the Korean stores were protected because they protected themselves. And that is a reoccurring theme in this Infringed documentary, is that, no matter what happens, is that you are your own first responder. You are responsible for your own defense. She interviews legal scholars, legal people that actually go to the Supreme Court, people that actually have influence in the Supreme Court, and talks about, is the Second Amendment a protected right? And with the Heller decision and the Bruin decision, what those do is show that common use is what their big standard is for determining if a firearm is to be banned or can be banned. And there is no more common use gun, and I've talked about it here, than the AR-15. There was one ex-cop who was actually talking about how proficient the AR-15 is, how efficient it is about doing its job. He was also a Iraqi veteran. So he's an Iraq War veteran, and he said, like I've said before, the United States is 0-3 for asymmetric warfare. For people like Joe Biden to come out and say, yet again, you need more than an AR-15 to fight the American military. Well, that's not the case. There are guys with flip-flops and AK-47s that kind of turned us back because you lose enough people, you lose enough security forces that it would... it's going to stem the tide. It's going to turn the tide. And they bring up this stark reality that, I learned a new term tonight that I should know because I am, quote unquote, a smart person, but democide. Democide is, I've always known what it was, I just didn't know they actually had a term for it. Democide is actually where the government is responsible for killing people. Case in point, the communists in China. Case in point, the communists in Russia. The German people. There's also something else I did learn tonight from watching Infringed. I had always thought that the Germans were disarmed by Hitler. That's not the case. Part of the Treaty of Versailles meant that you had to disarm the populace itself, the German people. And when that was completed, it kind of left that power vacuum for Hitler to come in and do the very horrible things he did to the Jewish people. If you look at Israel right now, just like Ukraine, when bad stuff happens, the first thing they do is start issuing guns to people, to citizens, so that they can protect and defend themselves firsthand. Lauren being the voice of this documentary is kind of poignant because she has the contrasting view of a Canadian, meaning she's lived in Canada. She has an opinion that's very much of an American. the Canadians right now are going through kind of Maoist type things to disarm the Canadian population. They can't even own a handgun anymore. They have banned the sale of handguns in Canada. The one ubiquitous firearm that most people that aren't even into guns have, because they know they have to defend themselves. And to look at Baltimore in that light, that it, for all intents and purposes, it is a gun-free zone, and that the people suffering are the normal citizens, because there's not enough law enforcement people, and there's not enough people to stop the tide of bad dudes doing bad things with guns. And what you find there is that these leftist politicians, these people that are for reforms in such stupid ways when it comes to the law, they're not prosecuting misdemeanors. Well, in Baltimore, it's a misdemeanor to carry a gun. However, they're not prosecuting any misdemeanors anymore in Baltimore, which has led to societal decay. You don't have to look too far from seeing that same type of policy happening in New Mexico and Albuquerque and seeing the rise in crime there. Or you look in California, you look at San Francisco is a prime example. You look at parts of LA. We are living in a country that is being so bifurcated by the stupidity of laws that are being put on the books by people that don't actually think about the long-term repercussions of what is going to happen with these laws. What it was more telling was to see how many people on Berkeley's campus, Berkeley University, which is kind of interesting because I actually got a scholarship to go to Berkeley for chemistry, and I didn't do it. I'm kind of thankful that I didn't, because I probably would have been a leftist hippie. Because colleges of nowadays, and back in the gap when I was going to school, had started becoming that leftist brewing pot of idealism that would get you into those situations where you don't think anymore for yourself independently. And that's something that is kind of inherent for people in the 2A. There's a lot of this bravado that the left looks on us as rednecks that don't want to give up our guns or our traditions. Well, that's kind of true, but we are a little more progressive in that we became very self-aware of the situation, especially after seeing the riots of the Summer of Love and seeing some of those brutal things that have happened. We've become more ingrained with that idea that we are our own first responders. We have to defend ourselves. We have to protect ourselves, our family, and those people around us, because that's what we do. So it's sad to see so many people that are brainwashed by mainstream media that aren't looking at this, the reality of the situation. If you look at mass shootings, we all know that mass shootings usually happen where there's a gun-free zone. It came out during this, the day before, I think it was yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday, where Steven Crowder, a comedian on YouTube, came out with the manifesto of the Nashville school shooter. That was very much motivated by leftist ideology and Maoist and communist ideology, if you read into parts of that. And it was very much racist ideology. There should be no worry about racism in the United States, but it's been amplified by leftists because they believe that, people are oppressed or have been oppressed nowadays because of their race. And the reality is that in the United States, we are only oppressed if we allow ourselves to be oppressed. If you are willing to sit back and live off the government dime and not do anything, you've just given up all your agency, your freedom, and your rights to say anything or do anything to the government. You know, if you take any lessons from history, 60 to 100,000 people, or 100 million, not 1,000, 100 million. So 60 to 100 million people died in China when the communists took over. And one of the first things that Mao did was go block by block, house by house, area by area to confiscate guns. Mao famously said that power comes from the muzzle of a gun. Why would we cede that power? Americans have always been that rebellious spirit, and it's time to get back to it. I think we are there. And you see it more and more, especially after things like the Summer of Love and COVID, all the lockdowns and the oppression that happened put on by our government. You're seeing more and more voices stand up and say no. You're seeing more people that have waken up. And they're waking up not in the leftist woke ideology. They're waking up and going, what you're saying doesn't make a lot of sense. And that is something that has been very common to the 2A since I've been in it. I first started shooting when I was like 4 or 5 years old with my dad. My dad did the same thing I did with my kids. He was teaching me about firearms and the responsibilities and what you need to do to be a responsible gun owner, because there's a possibility that I would be at one of my friends' houses or the neighbor kid or somebody's house and run into one of these, and what do you do with it? Oh no, don't touch that. Well, you don't know until you start learning, because those things are one of those items that raise curiosity, especially for kids. And I still can't get over the man who lost his daughter in the I think it's the Doug Morgan. Hang on, let me find out further. It's the Parkland shooting I was looking for, but it was at Stoneman Douglas High School. This is where law enforcement agents hid, and now that they have shown that in the face of overwhelming odds of a man that's more armed than they are, that they're not willing to protect you, even though that's their job, and that the government has cited on the law enforcement officer's case that they don't have a duty to protect you. How is it that the American people are supposed to give up their weapons and their ability to defend themselves when we know that if the stuff really hits the fan, if you look at those riots, they're not going to be able to help you. The cops aren't going to be able to help you. You're the only one that's going to be able to save you, your family, and everyone else around you. It is a tragic idea. The fact that you even think that, or that there's a lot of people that are starting to think that civil war would be a good thing, or maybe it's time. I don't think people understand the repercussions of what they're saying. This going down that path of a civil war would be the most brutal thing possible in the United States. Because now you would, for all of us in the 2A that actually do like some law enforcement agents, because they are good people, but they do have to get a paycheck. And if they are ordered to do something, it makes sense to me that they would go do what they think it is. It isn't going to be the soldiers that are being tasked with going house to house to confiscate guns. It's going to be law enforcement agents. And you can't tell me, after all that has happened in the United States over the last 5 years, that there's not going to be a lot of people that are going to fight tooth and nail to keep that from happening. Meaning that if they push that button, it will be the most bloody battles that are possible. Because you're looking at going house to house, block by block, with over 330 million American citizens and over 450 million Americans guns in the United States right now, and the highest gun ownership ever. Law enforcement knows they can't go door to door to confiscate this. In this Infringed document, they brought up, Cody Wilson. If you're not familiar with Cody Wilson, he's the guy that invented or started a company called DefCAD. These were the guys that pioneered 3D printing firearms. These are the guys that are making something now called the Ghost Gunner, which is a device that's about the size of a printer that actually can mill out a solid block of aluminum into either an AR-15 receiver or a 1911 receiver. Now think about that. This is where technology has been democratized so much that manufacturing can be done in the privacy of your home. No matter how much they try to fight the ghost gun ideal, it's not going to stop. That genie's out of the bottle. The fact that you think that you can put it back in the bottle tells me just how much hubris the government has. The government has a lot of hubris because they like to mess with things like the time. How do you change time and make it darker earlier and think that's actually saving us anything, saving us any resources? It's not. All you're doing is disrupting people's lives. Our government's notorious for this. And now we're going to go ahead and let them, well, some of the people will. We'll let them disarm them. I do not and will not comply with disarmament of the American citizen. That's why I get up here. I was doing it daily, but now I'm making a bi-weekly thing to get up on the mic and talk about what your rights are. Your rights are to be defended. You have the right to self-defense. You have the right to exist. And there's no one that can tell you no. There was a lot of talk in this thing about, in this Infringed documentary about red flag laws. Well, red flag laws are stupid. We live under them in New Mexico. They're a huge infringement on basic civil rights. And the guys that talk about it bring that up and talk about how there is a bright spot. But the bright spot that they tout to get these laws passed can't hold up to constitutional scrutiny. So when they go to court, everything has to click into line for them to be even sort of effective. Because most judges aren't going to be able to pull all those levers at once to make these quote-unquote red flag laws work. So why did we let them happen? It's simple. Every one of us knows that there's probably 1 or 2% of the gun owners that probably shouldn't own firearms. They're mentally defective. They're nuts. They're not capable of handling them. And we know this. And it makes us think that maybe we could do something. Makes some of us. And then you realize that every time we've ever given up an inch, Ronald Reagan was notorious for passing gun legislation that was anti-American. We live under the 1986 machine gun ban because of Ronald Reagan. Donald Trump is the reason why we are fighting right now to keep our bump stocks and any accessory we think we need or want, because the federal government has found a way, or they think they have, to arbitrarily declare something a prohibited item. Sorry, I'm a little tired. I stayed up a little bit later than I wanted to watch this Infringed documentary. It came out at 9 a.m., but I worked all day and decided I was going to watch it after watching my normal stuff. It was very impactful. It was very well done. And I highly recommend that if you get a chance, take a look at it. Eventually they'll release it to where it's not behind a paywall. Maybe you just pay for that one episode. And maybe you're not a fan of Tim Pool. But I can tell you that Tim, all he did was fund this. And how he funded it was with our membership money. And just like I'm willing to support Gun Owners of America and FPC, anyone who's willing to stand behind the 2A and put their money where their mouth is and who has totally reversed themselves. There was a point in time Tim Pool was very much anti-gun. The man isn't now. And we need those people in our corner. That we don't go looking for allies all the time that say something once in a while. Find the allies that are consistent with what their speech is. And he's found it. He is that guy. He's had Brandon Herrera on his show. He's had multiple people, and he's talked about gun control. He has Phil Labonte on there all the time, and Phil Labonte is not anti-2A at all. The man owns NFA firearms. So I would recommend find our allies. Quit funding these idiots that don't support our way of life. And that's what the 2A is for a lot of us. It's a way of life. Colion Noir famously sells swag, hats, t-shirts, and everything else about the pew-pew life, about how we live differently. We do. They're gun guys, they're car guys, they're guitar guys. Sometimes we're all of them. And that's cool. And yes, we are winning, despite what it looks like. And it's time for you to stand up and say, hey, yeah, I'm a gun owner. And what are you going to say? What are you going to do about it? The time for being silent about those hobbies, those things you like, because they're controversial, is over. Because if we don't stand up to be counted, we're going to stand on the other side of the fence when they round us up. Like, share, subscribe, and most importantly, be great.